Hello there. Mega Man X5 is a weird game. Opinions seem to be mixed on the 5th entry in the X series. Some people absolutely hate this game, while others seem to think it's okay, and a very small group of people really love this game. Well, I've beaten it, and I've taken a lot of time to gather my thoughts on this strange entry in the Mega Man franchise, and I think I've got a unique perspective that can help Mega Man fans better understand Mega Man X5, and really this chapter of gaming in general. And I'm excited to share that perspective with you in this review. Now, before I begin, I do want to warn everyone that there will be full spoilers for Mega Man X5, and really full spoilers for the Mega Man X sub-series up to this point, X1, X2, X3, and X4. So if you're trying to avoid Mega Man X spoilers, I'd recommend staying away from this video until you've played those games. Like all my reviews, I want to take time to consider the context in which this game exists, especially the time it came out and where the industry was at, and let's see if there can be any enjoyment added to the game if we really consider the context in which it was brought to the industry. X5 came out November of the year 2000 in Japan and January 31st, 2001 in North America. So it came out a few months after the PlayStation 2 was really established, and so this was an era in which the PlayStation 2 was beginning to dominate, but as we'll get into, the PlayStation brand in general was just really dominant at this time. Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8 had both come out in 1997 and 1996 in Japan for Mega Man 8. And Mega Man Legends had came out in 97 and 98 for North America, Japan, and Europe. And Mega Man Legends 2 was out in the year 2000 in North America and Japan. So there was a lot of Mega Man coming out during this time, but a pretty big time gap, especially in North America, from 1997 for Mega Man X4 to the year 2001 for Mega Man X5, and the industry had really changed a lot by the time Mega Man X5 entered our world. Not to mention, the Battle Network series would be coming out in a few months, and the Zero series was a little more than a year away from beginning. And it's no secret that Keiji Inafune, the Mega Man series' longtime creative heartbeat, had left the X series to work on the upcoming Zero game. So again, a lot was going on with Mega Man in general, but there was this big gap between X4 and X5, so it's a very interesting situation for this game to enter the world. And I do want to just mention where Mega Man was at considering the Marvel vs. Capcom series. These were huge games at this point. Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2 had both come out in 98 and the year 2000, and they featured the classic Mega Man characters and the Servbot from the Mega Man Legends series. So it's not hard to look at this time and really feel like the X series was kind of being put on the back burner. Mega Man 4 came out as the industry was shifting away from sprite art, but Mega Man 5 came out well after 3D polygons had begun to become the standard for the video game industry. Ironically, Capcom did some of their all-time best sprite art during this era. Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8 had come out at a time when Capcom was really all in on the Sega Saturn, and the Sega Saturn ports of their fighting games looked crisp. The sprite art looked so good in those Street Fighter Alpha games and the Marvel fighting games that were starting to come out at the time, and the sprite art still looked good over on the PS1 with the Street Fighter Alpha series. But you can make an argument that their best sprite art really came out between 1997 and 1999 when they released the arcade and eventual home ports of Street Fighter 3. And the same year that Mega Man X5 was released, Breath of Fire 4 came out on the same console, the PlayStation 1. And people would argue that that might be Capcom's best sprite art. So, even though sprite art was not on the cutting edge of game graphics at the time of Mega Man X5's release, Capcom was on the cutting edge of sprite art. So, that's why it feels crazy that Mega Man X5 looks as mediocre as it does. And I think it's okay to be a little bit disappointed when you look at this game and realize it's just not nearly as beautiful as even Mega Man games that came out right before it or other sprite art games that had come out at the same time. In the previous gaming generation, the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis had been the two juggernauts that had competed, and their successors, the Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64, had come out during this generation. Now, while Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8 were released on the Sega Saturn, by the time Mega Man X5 came out, the Sega Saturn had died an early death, for reasons that are too complicated for this video. And while the Nintendo 64 had its fans, especially in North America, the combined sales of the Sega Saturn and the Nintendo 64 were less than half of that of the PlayStation 1. This was the era of PlayStation domination that would really go on through the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 1 significantly expanded the game industry and really made gaming popular and mainstream amongst young adults, not just kids or youth. The PlayStation 1 was the most successful home video game console by a long shot at its time. And as the PlayStation 1 took over the console gaming industry, the home video and video game rental industry reached its peak. Depending on who you ask, the years 1995 to 2004 seem to be the peak years for the rental market. These two factors combined to make there be a huge demand for new games for the PlayStation 1 to be placed on the rental shelves or placed in the Christmas stocking at Christmas time. It's really hard to get our head around how much the game industry expanded at this time. For example, the PlayStation 1 library has over 4,000 games, and to put that in context, the previous generation's biggest consoles, the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, have less than 3,000 combined. This huge market of video game console owners and video game stores led to something that I think is distinct to the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 eras, and that is cheap games. Not bad games like the shovelware of the Wii era. Cheap games, games that are brought quickly to market, but were still able to compete on the video game shelf at Blockbuster Video. These games needed to be good enough, but they also needed to be released quickly. So for every grand AAA Final Fantasy or Metal Gear Solid, there were 5 Razor scooters or the Spec Op games, or really weird stuff like Mobile Light Force, which is a port of the anime-styled shmup called Gunbird. There was some really strange discount games being released at this time. Some really weird things like the Simple series being ported to America with games like bowling, tennis, and racing. Simple games that were cheap but still fun, especially for young people at the time. Though they would probably be a disappointing Christmas gift, they made for a great rental. Mega Man X5 is at its heart a cheap game. A game meant to compete on Blockbuster Video's rental shelf. And this can be confusing and maybe even a little bit disappointing if you look back at the X series. When it came out, it was really competing against the top quality games released on the Super Nintendo. And on the PS1, the Legend series was still trying to compete with those top quality releases of the era. But X5 is different. Again, Keiji Inafune is not involved in it. It is much later in the PlayStation 1 life cycle, and you just see the cheapness in the game. But again, not bad, just cheap. And I think that if you look at it as a game that was designed to compete against games like bowling or Razor Freestyle Scooter, you'll actually see it in a different light and see it as kind of a campy, fun B-movie style game. There's no animated cutscenes or voice acting, and there are a lot of still images that are pre-rendered PNG style images and reused assets. But I think there's actually a lot of heart to this game, and again, looking at the context really makes me appreciate it as like a good, cheap, fun game. Now that's the context. Now let's consider how much fun Mega Man X5 is to play today. How much fun does the game deliver when we look at it, when we listen to it, and experience its gameplay? Now, quick little side note, I might mess up some of the names of the robot bosses in this game. I have memories of renting it back in the day, and the boss names in the guide I'm using are those Guns N' Roses puns. When the game was first brought to America, the translators changed the robot bosses' names to be puns relating to the band Guns N' Roses, which is hilarious, but I'm going to try to reference their real names as they are translated in the Anniversary Collection. So my bad if I slip up and miss one or two Guns N' Roses name while I'm editing this. So let's get right into the intro of the game. Right from the start, you'll see one of this game's signature styles, and that is still images. The intro is mostly a slideshow of still images sliding around rather than the anime intros we got from games like Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8. Most of the art, though, is still pretty good, especially in this intro. There are some flashbacks to earlier moments in the X series, and I especially like the schematics that call back to the beginning of X1, and it's got some great music playing during this intro. When we start the game, we're given a character select screen, just like in Mega Man X4. But unlike Mega Man X4, this character select screen doesn't look very good. Mega Man X4 had an almost Street Fighter Alpha look to it with the big sprites, but this selection screen looks kind of busy and cheap. I'll also explain here that Mega Man X5 handles character selection very differently than Mega Man X4. This character select screen basically means nothing. You'll be able to pick between X and Zero and X's armors, which is kind of weird, at the start of each preceding level. Those of you who watched my Mega Man X4 review may remember me lamenting that I wished I could switch between X and Zero at any point, and this is what I asked for. I'll get more into it later, but this actually doesn't really pan out to very much added fun to the game, but I'll get back to that later. I just wanted to address that, yes, the character selection is more in line with what I wanted from X4. Unfortunately, this game doesn't really wind up taking advantage of that. Before the level starts, we get this mysterious character talking, and we can assume he's talking to Sigma, the villain of the X series. And this mysterious figure is wondering if X and Zero are really that strong. This character is Dynamo. He's this game's Vile, and we'll see him again later. The intro level isn't really anything to write home about. The most noticeable thing about the intro level is Aaliyah. She's a new character who radios in from time to talk to you during levels. She's kind of like Navi in Ocarina of Time, and she calls a lot. And there's no way to skip her calls, and about 99% of what she says is totally unneeded and doesn't really need to be there. And again, she calls very frequently. I'll talk more about this later in the review, but this does disrupt the pacing of the game, especially when you're playing as Zero and as X, because there are separate calls for both. It's a lot, and it's not an added bonus to the game. Aaliyah's calls, I think, wind up being a pretty significant problem when you're trying to play this game, especially playing it quickly and trying to really embrace the fast-paced nature of the X series. I selected X for the first level of the game rather than Zero, and there are some cool things about controlling him in this game. You start out being able to hover and dash in the air and use the supercharged Buster, just like you could at the end of X4. It really does feel like the X at the start of this game is the super powered up fighter at the end of X4. Also, you can duck and hang onto wires, which add a little bit of new action to the formula. You get the classic Mega Man X crushing wall in this level, and then you have your first fight against Sigma. The giant statue's head blows up and reveals Sigma's giant head. In my X4 review, I mentioned that there are these ugly pre-rendered graphics from time to time. Well, X5 takes this to the extreme. There's a lot of pre-rendered graphics, and a lot of the time they are ugly, but actually I think in this case it's so bad that it's good. Sigma's face just looks crazy. I can imagine modern indie devs trying to emulate this style. It really is distinct to this game, and yes, these pre-rendered graphics are ugly, but again, there's a so bad it's good B-movie campy vibe to it. The fight is pretty basic aside from how he looks, though it is still shocking to see his giant mouth open and shoot a laser like that. It's very weird. Now we wind up back in Maverick Hunter HQ, and we just get a ton of info thrown at us. There's a new commander named Cygnus. We see Aaliyah. There's another scientist looking guy that I honestly didn't write down his name, and I think that proves the point that he's a pretty forgettable character. There's a lot of characters and then a lot of information just thrown at you, and this is where Mega Man X5 really stands out in the series. It's revealed that the Sigma virus is spreading rapidly and causing more and more robots to go Maverick, and also a space colony is about to crash into the Earth. In 16 hours it will hit and destroy most of the life on planet Earth. The only hope is to blow up the space colony before it hits the Earth with an old cannon that they have, or wreck a space shuttle into it. the boss robots are revealed to have the parts needed to fix the space cannon to shoot down the satellite. And what's really interesting is this game gives you the option of going to all the bosses, but it's pretty clear that the ones on the left are the ones you need to go to. And we're running out of time. We have 16 hours. And I try to kind of maybe role play a little bit as I play these games, like really play them the way that they're telling me to play them. The game's telling me I don't have a lot of time. It's telling me that these are the dudes I need to go fight, and so I'm gonna go fight them. The first level I went to was Crescent Grizzly, and again I picked X for this level. This level is similar to Slash Beast stage in Mega Man X4, but with trucks rather than train cars. There's nothing particularly special about it except that you have to duck in front of the trucks to shoot the blue light. And again, remembering to duck is a new quirk to the gameplay. But it's a cool enough level, and at the end, you wreck the truck into a cave that's clearly meant to be the secret base from the beginning of Mega Man X2. This is one of the many cool nostalgic touches that Mega Man X5 has that call back to the previous X games, and I really like this. I really want to highlight this. This game, yes, is a cheap game. There was clearly not as much time and money available to make this game, but they had heart. They had a real love for the Mega Man franchise and do throw in these little Easter eggs for longtime fans that I really appreciate, and I think a lot of other Mega Man fans will appreciate. Crescent Grizzly himself is a relatively standard boss fight. He's fun to fight, it's a cool boss arena with some higher and lower platforms, and he does some quirky things that make his fight kind of dynamic and interesting. But we also see where the cheapness starts really coming through in Mega Man X5. His animations, Crescent Grizzly the boss, looks very stilted. Like, sometimes it looks like he's just got 2 or 3 different frames of animation. It's pretty rough. It's not fluid, especially if you're looking back at games like Mega Man X4 or really Mega Man 8. This really stands out. This is not great animation for a boss fight. But again, they clearly didn't have the budget, but little touches like that secret base, I think really show a lot of passion. After I beat Crescent Grizzly, I wanted to go back and check the level out with Zero. In my X4 review, I mentioned that I wish you could switch back and forth between Zero and X to the game during the game rather than being stuck with the one you pick from the very beginning. This game has the feature to switch, but unfortunately, it's not very well implemented. The biggest thing is that, for starters, the game is constantly reminding you of how many hours you have left before the space colony falls to Earth, and so it really is, at least from a narrative sense, discouraging you from going back and exploring and trying things. And also, I know that skilled players are going to be able to get around this and explore everything really quick, but again, I kind of want to play the game in the way that I am encouraged to play it. The bigger problem, though, I think, is that the way the game is designed, Zero doesn't fit in as well in the levels. I tried him another point in the game, and again, I had the same kind of problem. Enemies shoot a lot from a distance. They have a lot of abilities to get you at a far distance away, whereas Zero's got to get close with his sword. And I don't know, I just had a harder time playing with Zero. In X4, it seemed like they were really optimized for both characters. Maybe they actually did do some slight tweaks depending on which character you picked, but when I played as Zero in this game, I just felt like I was the wrong character. I just couldn't get into the groove of it. And then the other issue is Aaliyah. She calls a lot on the radio, and when you play as Zero, you're going to get a fresh batch of radio calls, and from what I could tell, these radio calls were pointless. So again, you do have the ability to switch characters, which is something I asked for, but it's not particularly exciting here. Also, exploration, something that the Mega Man X1 and X2 and X3 games really did well and had a lot of exploration. This is more in the X4 style. There's less exploration. Everything's pretty straightforward to find it. So again, they're not really fun levels to revisit and explore. And so, yeah, switching between Zero and X did not happen a whole lot. I basically just stuck with X the whole time. So moving on to the next level, I picked Tidal Whale. This level has a newly remixed version of Launch Octopus's level theme, and it's great. I love how it sounds. Also, the pufferfish from Launch Octopus's level is back. These fun little nostalgic touches do a lot to make this game more fun to play. Unfortunately, this level also has one of the slowest auto-scrolling sections I've ever seen in a Mega Man game. There's a large submarine that follows you, and you can only move through the level at the pace of the submarine following you. It's a drag. It really slows things down, especially when you mix in a couple calls from Aaliyah, and you really begin to feel the poor pacing of Mega Man X5. Fighting Tidal Whale at the end of the level is actually pretty fun. He's a cool boss fight. Again, there's kind of limited animation like Crescent Grizzly, but it's a cool fight how he shoots the ice squares at you and tries to push you back against the spikes. I thought it was a pretty fun, unique fight. But what's really interesting about Tidal Whale is the dialogue before you fight him. Unlike the Aaliyah calls, the dialogue with a lot of these bosses is really interesting and again shows a lot of the heart that went into making this game. X explains that he needs hydrogen from the ocean to use in the cannon, but Tidal Whale doesn't trust X, and so they have to fight. You really get a sense that the Maverick Hunters are not particularly well loved in this world. It's also worth mentioning that after boss fights, you get a screen where Leah talks to you. She says a lot. Not only do you get new weapons, but you get a chance to make items after defeating a boss. It's confusing and kind of time consuming. Again, when you only got 8 levels that you beat, you get this message quite a bit. If you're going to play the levels as more than one character, you're going to get these messages quite a bit. And it's kind of disappointing because I remember how cool some of the boss victory sequences were in Mega Man X1 and X2. These are not particularly cool victory sequences. It's another small thing, but I really think it does affect the pacing and the general feel of playing through X5. The game then had me fight Dynamo. I didn't really get much from these fights. He is uniquely animated. He doesn't look as cheap as the other characters, which is kind of cool. The fights aren't particularly exciting or interesting, but they're just kind of fun. I would say they're a step down from fighting Vile or the Colonel in Mega Man X4, but not bad. I never really fully understood what his motivation was, which is kind of disappointing because Vile is just that classic evil, nasty dude, and so you want to fight him. And the Colonel in particular had a lot of motivation for what was going on and a lot of drama really mixed into fighting him. Dynamo is definitely a step down from those guys. I do want to mention that if you want to support the channel, please go to Steam and wishlist my upcoming game, Ogre Man. It's a game I've been developing, taking the insights I've learned from reviewing all these different Mega Man games, and hopefully making something that's kind of going to be special and fun and quirky for people who are fans of action platformers. So there's a link in the description below. You can go to Steam and wishlist Ogre Man now. I would really appreciate it. It would really help me out as a channel. And now, back to my review of Mega Man X5. Then I went to Volt Kraken's level. This is the worst level in the game, and maybe my least favorite level in the X series so far. For starters, you have the cheapest on-rails section I have ever played. I've been clear about my frustration with the rail sections in Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8, but none of those were as bad as this. There is an old YouTube video mocking how this level just places you basically in a pit right after the ready is displayed at the start of the level. If you watch the Mega Man X5 OST YouTube video, the top comment is someone mocking this level's start. It's shocking. It's like someone didn't playtest it. You just fall right into a pit. It's crazy difficult, but what makes it worse is what comes after. Aaliyah decides to explain to you that you need this energy shot to blow up this wall that you're standing in front of. It's confusing, and then you get this slow animation of X shooting one shot at a time to destroy the wall, and it doesn't work. And so this is just such a weird way to start a level. You have a super frustrating sequence of scrolling challenges, and then you get this weird just slow the game down to a crawl for some dialogue and watching X shoot at a wall. It's really weird. In my mind, the X games are fast-paced and dependent on the player's ability to move through the level. For example, in Mega Man X1, you have Armored Armadillo's level where you ride a minecart, but you can choose to get off the minecart and go slower if you want. And just like in Mega Man X5, after this rail section, in Armored Armadillo's minecart section, there's a secret that you can find. Or you don't, and it happens quickly. Whereas in Mega Man X5, you have this crazy rail section that you're stuck to. There's no way to change how you approach it. And then afterwards, if you didn't find the secret, you have to painfully watch the game show you that you didn't figure out the secret. What you're supposed to do is pick up all the blue energy balls in the rail section, and when X has them, he'll have enough shots to knock down the door. I did this. It's extremely cumbersome and annoying to get the balls. They're placed in some seriously malicious spots. I'm pretty sure you can ride under them. They are close together at points. you got to be so precise to get them right. You got to really hammer the shooting button to shoot through the obstacles that you're hitting. It's really intense. I cannot imagine someone playtested this level and said, oh yeah, this is great, people are going to love it. It really feels like it got slapped together. A guy got through it once and said, hey, it'll work. But it is what it is. There's not a lot of levels in Mega Man X5, so for a level to be this bad really does drag down the overall experience. Though, on a positive note, I do want to mention the Volt Kraken fight. His dialogue is, again, really interesting. It mentions that he knew Launch Octopus from the first Mega Man X game, and that he quit being a Maverick Hunter after X killed him. Again, this little touch really adds a lot of personality to the game overall, and I found it really interesting. Then I went on to Shining Firefly's level. This level has some of the strangest pre-rendered graphics I've ever seen. For starters, the castle in the background looks like something from like Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance. It's really just weirdly blurry and flat. Then when you get going, you eventually find these crazy looking stairs. These stairs are just so interesting to me. For starters, there was a staircase in Mega Man X4 that did a similar thing but looked way better, and they clearly reused assets in this game, so I don't understand why the staircase is so bad in this level. I know I am kind of a weird player when I play video games, but I found myself really staring at these stairs and really wondering, where is X supposed to be on the stairs? Is he laying down on the stairs and like scooting up them? If he's standing on the stairs, how is he standing on them? Because they're tilted upwards. It's such a weird perspective. There's a couple moments in this game that have that weird perspective. The first level has the pre-rendered giant statue head that follows you into the battle room. It's really odd. Like, is the statue moving or is the room moving? That's weird. And then during the Dynamo fight, the space shuttle in the background is upside down. Like X and Dynamo are somehow standing above the shuttle, tilted back towards it. And again, these stairs are like tilted back sideways again. Like X should be laying on them. So these pre-rendered graphics are really weird. They're cheap and ugly, that's definitely true, but for me they're also charming in a weird way. There's something almost like an MCS you're painting to looking at that shuttle and looking at these stairs. I kind of dig it. I don't know. I understand that it does not look as good as other games, but they just take it to the extreme. And whereas in like Mega Man X4, the pre-rendered graphics kind of stood out as like, whoa, that's kind of weird, especially considering that Mega Man 8 came out at the same time. With this game, the ugly pre-rendered stuff comes at you so much that you kind of just get used to it and kind of accept it. And is it overall a good thing? No, probably not. Does it have its charm in its weird way? Yes. So when you get to the fight against Shining Firefly, there's another pre-rendered PNG looking background that just gets dark and bright in the background. It's a really, again, just simple, basic way to do level art. The level itself isn't too bad. I like the touch of knocking down the bridge when you're storming the castle. I also ran into the Sigma virus here, and there's a little indicator in the corner of the screen that when you hit the viruses, X is infected based on how many times you run into the Sigma virus. Is the Sigma virus just a shrunk down version of the pre-rendered Sigma head from the beginning of the game, tinted purple? Yeah, I think it is. But is it weirdly funny? Yes. It's worth mentioning here that this game has multiple scenarios that can play out with the cannon and the shuttle and Zero, depending on what happens. It's kind of tricky. From what I can tell, there are random numbers generated at the start of the game and as you play through it, and these numbers can manipulate how things play out. I just played through the game and just let it happen. So after completing the cannon and getting the parts we needed, we shot the space colony and wasn't able to be completely destroyed. So we need to fight the other robot bosses and get the parts for the shuttle. I had mixed feelings about this because the 16 hours to save Earth is interesting and kind of exciting, but I don't love that, again, we're discouraged from really exploring from a narrative standpoint. But the drama is cool, the story's intense, and overall it does work for me.
Then I moved on to Dark Necrobat's level. I think that this level does a great job of displaying this game's cheap but still high effort production values. You're in a planetarium with the constellations in the background, and while yes, these constellations do look like cheap PNGs, it's a cool idea that they have these ancient Greek looking constellations in the background, and it's just a creative, fun idea. Large portions of this level are on floating platforms, which isn't my favorite kind of level design due to how much standing and waiting happens, but overall it's still a fun level. Then I took off to fight Spiral Pegasus. This level has bombs that will damage you if you don't destroy them quick enough. I think I should also mention here that there are scientists throughout the game that you can rescue. I'm not actually 100% sure what rescuing the scientist does. I think it gets you extra lives or something at the end of a level or when you leave, but it's a fun touch. I like the scientists and I want to help them when I see them. Spiral Pegasus is an interesting character because he was part of the Repliforce in Mega Man X4, and again, it's just a little bit of nice characterization, a little bit of effort added to the dialogue that really just goes a long way in really selling this world to me. During the fight, he's actually very similar to Storm Eagle in Mega Man X1, which is a cool callback, but unfortunately his animation is very stilted. Kind of reminds me of Crescent Grizzly earlier in the game. He doesn't look very good while you're fighting him. Then in Burn Dino Rex's level, we get an interesting gimmick. There are moments where lava flows through the level and you have to hide behind rocks and wait for the lava to pass. While it's kind of a cool set piece, I don't really like waiting. Again, I've mentioned that there are many moments in this game where you gotta wait, and these are set up not to where you can necessarily just go as fast as you can and wait for a second. Like, the lava flows for quite a while, and there are some moments where you have to wait for the lava to flow and break down the barrier in front of you. So again, it's a cool idea, but it's the waiting and when you stack that on top of other levels that have you waiting for submarines or moving platforms or Aaliyah to talk, you just kind of wind up in a lot of situations where the action kind of comes to a standstill, and so this level is a little bit disappointing for that reason, even though it is a cool set piece that you're going into this volcano that's actively erupting. The level has a branching path at the end, which is unique for this game, and one path lets you use a right armor in the lava. Again, back to that cheap production value, the right armor I think is identical to the one from Mega Man X4, and you go into the lava, everything becomes tinted a yellow-orange, but the right armor doesn't cover Mega Man's head, which is kind of goofy, I guess, I don't know. If you go the other way though, you get a much cooler encounter. This probably should have been the only option, is a flying dinosaur coming after you, and then eventually you get to fight it. It's a really cool idea, and it's fun, and kind of a callback to the dragon in Mega Man 2. So overall, this level's a bit of a mixed bag, yeah, I think the flying dinosaur fight's pretty fun. Lastly, we move on to Spike Rosered. This is a relatively short and uneventful level. Aaliyah mentions that this is an old Repliforce base, which is another piece of cool lore. Spike Rosered himself actually looks pretty cool and has decent animation. He kind of sticks out in this game. I honestly kind of wonder if him and Dynamo are leftover assets from Mega Man X4's development, because their style and their animation really would fit in better with that game. And now, as we defeat the robots, our plot really thickens. Zero wrecked the shuttle into the space colony, finally destroying it. And again, there are multiple ways this could play out, but this is the result I got. Previously, it was mentioned that Zero is immune to the Sigma virus, and now Aaliyah explains how the virus from the colony has combined with the Sigma virus on the Earth, and she dubs this new combined virus the Zero virus. Now we need to go to the Sigma levels and fight him. I decided that before fighting Sigma though, I wanted to do a little bit of backtracking and item collecting. There was no longer the 16-hour timer, and this just seemed like a good time to do it. This is a bit of a mixed bag. In my review of Mega Man X4, I mentioned how the exploration elements from Mega Man X1, X2, and X3 had been minimized. This disappointing trend continues in Mega Man X5, and even more unfortunately, X5 levels are not as much fun as X4's. X4's levels overall felt fast-paced and balanced for both characters, and though there wasn't much exploration, there was a lot of intense combat and cool moments. Upon revisiting X5 levels, they feel kind of sloppy and slow-paced. Waiting for the submarine really stands out again as something that slows that pace down to a crawl, but then you also got waiting for lava and waiting for X to slowly shoot down doors. Again, it's not a particularly well-paced group of levels. That being said, I'm glad I did it because I was able to earn the Falcon armor. In this game, armor doesn't really work the way that it did in previous games. You have to get all the pieces before the armor is usable. But once you have it, you can fly around. This is really fun, and there are some specific items that you are only able to get by flying around levels with this Falcon armor. Previous Mega Man games have had jetpacks and air dashes, but I've got to say that the Falcon armor is the most fun I've had flying in a Mega Man game. I am aware that there is another set of armor in this game, but as I mentioned, I didn't particularly enjoy the backtracking in this game, so I'm only going to go with the completed Falcon armor. I also played a little bit more as Zero, and again, I just can't quite get into playing as Zero in this game. I know some other people like Zero a lot in this game, and I loved Zero in Mega Man X4, but here I just can't quite get into it. I feel like the levels are balanced a little bit better for X, so that's just the way I wound up playing the game. The Sigma levels are pretty rough in this game from a presentation perspective. The level art is basically the same for 3 of them. It's this kind of digital inside the internet looking design with what I assume are quite a bit of pre-rendered graphics. It doesn't look great, and at one point they changed the color of it to kind of mix it up, but you can tell it's just the same art. It also displays the same music for these levels that you get during the level select screen. So again, you kind of get to this finale of the game and you get 3 of the ugliest levels in the game and the level select music just looping. It's not a great way to present the ending of the game. There is a little bit of different level art when you get to the boss rush part of the Sigma levels. They have this like kind of spinning room in the background. It doesn't really look much better. It also has a different song that didn't particularly stand out in my mind. Overall, again, it's pretty rough. If you look at other Mega Man games, sometimes they save kind of the best for last. I think of the creepy Sigma pods at the end of X3, or the epic music in Mega Man 9 at the end. And also, it's just interesting to think about these Sigma levels in terms of like, where are we supposed to be as a player? This game doesn't do a very good job of like really explaining where we are. If you look at the world map in this game, in the middle, it looks like you're somewhere around Europe and Asia, I guess. But it doesn't really make anything feel distinct. Whereas if you compare that to, like, let's say Mega Man X2, the world map would shift up when you went to Sigma's levels, or in Mega Man X1, you really had this sense in the first Sigma level that you're like storming a castle, you're on the outside fighting your way up into Sigma's fortress. Here, you just kind of click Sigma's level, and now you're kind of like inside of the internet, is what I kind of get from this level art. It's, again, not great level art, not great design in that regard. From a gameplay standpoint, the first Sigma level is actually pretty fun though. You get some lasers that are definitely a callback to the lasers in Quickman stage in Mega Man 2, and they're pretty tricky. I actually wound up using the clock that can stop time to get past them, and at the end, the Yellow Devil is back from the classic Mega Man series, but this time he's black. Again, I love these throwback fights. I love the way that this game has a lot of throwbacks to other Mega Man games, and this is just a pretty fun fight, and eventually he even transforms into this cool skull that looks like one of Wily's machines from previous Mega Man games. Overall, I think it's a fun fight. The second Sigma stage, you get a pretty big difficulty spike. The level itself is pretty tricky to get through, even using the Falcon armor. Also, the Sigma virus here looks like Zero, and it dashes towards you rather than just kind of hovering towards you. So it's a bit trickier to avoid the Sigma virus in this level. You get some really tricky platforming where you gotta go up a wall that has spikes on it, and there's enemies around you. It's a pretty challenging level, and I do like this kind of difficulty spike right at the end. Then you got a gnarly boss fight where you have this wall that has these eyes that come out and do different attacks, and then a crushing wall that comes in, and you gotta stay up on the crushing wall while avoiding the spikes while this little fire goes around. It's really intense. It's really hard platforming. It took me a lot of tries to get through it, but overall I thought that this fight and the new Dark Yellow Devil fight were really fun and good kind of finale boss fights. In level 3, you get some hanging sections that are relatively forgettable, and then the Zero fight. It's not great. It's pretty disappointing. Zero and X have some kind of stilted dialogue about how much they care about each other. Zero doesn't really want to go back to the Maverick Hunter HQ, so they have to fight. I don't know really what they were getting at with this fight. I know there's other ways this scenario can play out and other conversations they can have, and maybe those would make it more fun. But again, I just kind of played through the game straightforward in the way that I felt the game wanted me to play, and this is the conflict that I got. It is interesting that the Wily logo shows up in the background, kind of really solidifying their connection. But I don't know, I felt like this is a disappointing fight. There's no real significant music or animation to make the fight present itself in a unique way. And what I think is most disappointing about this fight is that if you've played the X series to this point, you probably know that Mega Man X2 has an epic Zero fight. It's debatably the best boss fight in the series in my opinion, and it's fast paced and it's intense and the music is cool and the level around you kind of breaks up and changes during the fight. It's really epic and awesome, and this is a major step down from that fight, and that was on the Super Nintendo. So as far as this big finale, this big conflict between X and Zero, this is a pretty disappointing moment in the game. I don't know, maybe just objectively just playing through it, it's a kind of fun fight. I felt like it was comparable to like the Dynamo fights earlier in the game. I wouldn't even say it's as good as the Colonel fights from Mega Man X4. From a narrative standpoint, it's also kind of confusing. At the end of the fight, they both faint because one of them used Soul Body, and I don't really know what the game is referring to when it's describing this. And then we're back at Maverick HQ, and we go back to Sigma's fortress for the boss rush. Now, the boss rush in this game is not my favorite boss rush. I actually like the boss rushes at the end of the Mega Man series because it makes you feel really powerful when you fight all these bosses just one after the other. This boss rush is kind of different because they seem to have expanded the health bars quite a bit. The bosses here are just bullet sponges. They take a long time to beat, even if you're using the right weapon against them. It's a long time. I actually think it would be better if they went the reverse, just made the bosses a little bit weaker. Again, just kind of showing you the player that, hey, now you can just really rock these guys. I guess a nice touch though is that there is health refills every time you enter the boss rush chamber, so filling up your E-tanks and stuff like that isn't really too much of a chore at this stage in the game. So that's a nice touch, but overall it is annoying that they added more health to the bosses for this final boss rush. Then after that, we get to the Sigma fight, the final fight of the game. The room itself is interesting. I like the broken pods and the X and Zero schematics in the background. Again, it's kind of a callback to the very first shot of Mega Man X1 where we see the schematics of Mega Man X. And the health at the door is a nice touch. It lets you refill your health and do what you gotta do rather than backtracking on other levels or something to fill up your E-tanks. And I like that. The fight itself, though, is kind of crappy. Sigma himself looks more bland and stilted than he ever has before, and he dashes around the room and does stuff that we've already seen him do. Compared to how pumped up and high energy he looked at the end of X4, or how creepy he looked at the end of X3, this is pretty disappointing. Or the epic cinematic conclusion where he has a dog with him at the end of X1. Here, he just kind of looks like a dollar store villain. He looks pretty generic. The worst part about this fight, though, is that he has this attack that he does where he hovers in the air, and occasionally the sprite of the attack flickers, so you can get hit by an attack that's basically invisible and covers up almost half the screen. I watched other playthroughs and I saw someone encountering the same kind of thing, so I don't know if it's unique to the Anniversary Collection, but it really is a major oversight at the end of a game like this where you get this attack that can just rock you, that the sprite can flicker out and you won't even see it. Then after we beat Sigma, we get the final phase of Sigma, and it really goes out with a bang. Perhaps the greatest, ugliest pre-rendered graphic in the game. We get the giant Sigma head from the beginning, but a little bigger and at a different angle, and it's equally funny and horrifying. It's also interesting that he mentions he now has a partner who hates X. I don't really understand necessarily why Sigma hates X. I assume the partner is Dr. Wily. I guess it's kind of alluded to, but we never really get it confirmed who this partner is. Either way, I think this fight is kind of fun in a big, wild, campy way. Again, the sprite for Sigma's face is just so big and ugly. It's weird too because his hands, like his fists, are moving around, and you gotta kind of dodge them, and the fists actually look different than the head. The head looks pre-rendered, whereas the fists look kind of like old sprite art, like almost like something you'd see on a Super Nintendo game. It is kind of ugly and kind of similar to other things we've seen in this game, but overall, I think just these giant pre-rendered ugly Sigma heads are funny, and so I guess it worked for me as a way to conclude the game. After we get through the fight, there is the final cutscene. X holds Zero's body, and a gray blob of Sigma shoots a laser through both of them, and while in the air, Zero shoots back at the blob, and that is kind of how he defeats the blob, I assume. In my review of Mega Man X4, I compared the X series to a shonen anime, and this ending is very shonen. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but I like it. A glowing figure shows up and helps X, and I assume that glowing figure is Dr. Light, and then we skip ahead by a few years. It's made clear that X is still fighting bad robots, but now he has Zero's saber. Kind of like in the Dragon Ball series, once you've had characters die and brought back like they did with Zero in Mega Man X2, it kind of loses a lot of its impact. So overall, the story in this game is a bit of a mixed bag, but I like it. I do really want to drive home that shonen comparison. The space colony falling and the battles and the drama between X and Zero feels very much like a 90s or 2000s anime. I think even Gundam Wing on Toonami back in the day had a space colony falling at the end. So yeah, I really like the storyline and the vibe it's kind of given off. Now, you can't really talk about a Mega Man game without talking about the music, and overall, the soundtrack in this game is excellent. There are a couple tracks that don't stand out necessarily, but there are a lot of tracks that really do stand out as some of the best music in the game. It's a catchy blend of power rock and synth. It does a great job of setting the kind of intense vibe that Mega Man X4 kind of set up, but still catchy like other Mega Man soundtracks are. They do a great job of kind of just getting me pumped to play through these levels. Volt Kraken and Dark Necrobat's music stand out to me as just really fun, awesome music in this game. I've mentioned before that Volt Kraken's level has that awful on-rails sequence, but the song is awesome. So you're just hearing this really cool song. It kind of does make it more palatable. So yeah, those are really cool songs. Also, the ending song at the end of the game stands out in my mind as another cool track. This is an interesting era for music production in games. The ability to use samples and instruments had greatly expanded from the 16-bit era of the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. So you hear the added instrumentation, and it's more rich and more lush in this game than music from the previous generation. Yet there were still some limitations that made things be a bit more compressed than what you would get just from, a pure CD. And so I like that kind of just compressed. It's kind of a little bit low tech in the way that it sounds, but it's just awesome music. It really does stand out as a great Mega Man soundtrack. Even as someone who's played a bunch of Mega Man games, I'll say Mega Man X5 has great music that really does stand out. Now, before totally wrapping things up, I do want to mention my own nostalgia for this game. Earlier, I discussed how this game was intended really for the late 90s, early 2000s rental market. And I was there. I rented this game with my friend in 4th grade. This was during the peak Toonami anime era. And this game's storyline just feels like something straight out of Toonami. Again, this game, for what it is, really worked well at the time that it came out. And when I played it as a kid, even having played other Mega Man games, I thought it was awesome. Also, there was the really weird references to Guns N' Roses. All the character names had these references to Guns N' Roses at the time, or at least all the robot boss names. And I wasn't a Guns N' Roses fan as a kid, but weirdly enough, my friend was. I think his parents had gotten him into Guns N' Roses, and I think he recognized the references a little bit, was trying to explain it to me. It was just so mysterious to me. So I definitely got to mention that I do have some nostalgia for this game. But I don't think that the nostalgia clouds my judgment. I think it actually gives me a little bit of a perspective on a way to think about this game. Again, it's a cheaply made game targeted for a specific gaming market at a very specific time. And in that regard, I think it works. And again, it really is just a great example of fun anime storytelling from that time. So wrapping it up, X5 is a weird, cheap game. As the intended conclusion of the X series, a series that if you consider the run from X1 to X4 as, you know, some all-time classic games, X5 is really disappointing. It's not an all-time classic game. It is not particularly well balanced between its characters. The levels can be a little bit sloppy. The design of the enemies and placement of things is not as well thought out as previous games. The exploration elements are gone from X1 through 3, and the tight action-based design of X4 is also not here. The production value is majorly lacking, and at times the game is just plain ugly, and so yeah, there's a lot to hold against this game. But at the same time, I think it's really enjoyable in a campy B-movie kind of way. Some of those ugly level design elements and ugly art elements I think have a real pop to them. Also, some of the dialogue and some of the callbacks to other Mega Man games show a real sense of passion and energy. On the PlayStation 1 in Japan, there was a simple series of games. A series of games that were meant to be cheap, simple, fun games. And a lot of people look back at these games with nostalgia. Some of them came out in America, some of them didn't. I think if Mega Man X5 was a simple game, if it was called, you know, Simple Mega Man or Simple Mega Man X5, people would view it differently. They'd say, oh, this was meant to be kind of like a cheap, fun game for people still playing on the PlayStation 1 after the PlayStation 2 came out. And they might view it a little bit differently. I don't know. So I think considering the context in which this game was developed and released really does add a little bit of value to it. That being said, it is not as good as the other Mega Man X games. There are some major shortcomings, and there's a lot of things that those games do that just makes them objectively more fun to play than X5, even though I did get quite a bit of enjoyment out of X5. All that being said, I'm going to give Mega Man X5 a 7.9 out of 10. I would say once you get into the 8s, we're talking about, you know, a great game, and then, you know, 9s and 10s, we're talking like all-time classics. This isn't a great game. It's a good game for what it is. If you like Mega Man games, I think you'll enjoy this game a lot. And if you like action platformers, I think that, again, you can get some enjoyment from this. If you don't like action platformers or you don't like Mega Man, there's really probably not a lot here for you to enjoy at all. So, again, I'll say 7.9 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about Mega Man X5. I tried to get this review done faster, really kind of trying to play through the games a lot more this season. So thank you all for coming back for my X4 review. Sorry about the wait on that one. And hopefully between this game and X6, again, I'll be able to get it done quickly. So thanks for watching. Hope you all are having a great day and a great year. And I'll see you at the next review.